Let me ask you something. When's the last time you wanted something so badly that you stopped letting yourself want it? Not because it was impossible, but because actually reaching for it felt like setting yourself up for something worse. Most of us know that feeling, that quiet decision to shrink, to expect less. This is a video about a boy whose biggest dream was toast with jam. Not jam specifically. He'd heard that's how normal people eat it. He'd never actually tried it. And I think that one detail from the very first chapter is the most heartbreaking thing Tatsuki Fujimoto ever wrote. Here's what Chapter 1 shows us before anything else happens. Denji is doing math in his head, not homework. He's calculating his debt. 60,000 yen from cutting trees, 1.2 million from selling his kidney, 300,000 from his right eye, less than 100,000 for one of his, and the manga just says nuts. I'm not paraphrasing. After all of that, Denji still owes 38,040,000 yen. Then he kills a devil, turns in the body, and the Yakuza deducts interest, a finder's fee, an admin fee, management costs, and hands him back 1,800 yen. A McDonald's combo in Japan cost about 700 yen. So this 16-year-old kid, one eye, one kidney, one testicle, risked his life and came home with enough money for 2.5 Big Macs. Then he goes back to his shed, sits on the floor, eats plain bread, and tells his dog he heard people put jam on it. But that's just a dream for someone like him. That's how Chainsaw Man starts. Not with a power awakening, with a kid on the floor of a shed, alone, telling his dog about jam. And if you laughed at that, I want you to hold on to that laugh, because Fujimoto is about to use it against you. Let me strip away everything for a second. No devils, no chainsaws, just the facts of Denji's life. He is 16. His father died by suicide and left him a debt he had no part in creating. No family, no school, no friends. The adults in his life are Yakuza bosses who, in Chapter 1, have their driver offer Denji 100 yen to eat a cigarette butt off the ground. Denji eats it, then spits it out when they leave, which, okay, that's kind of a power move, but still, his only relationship is with an injured devil he found at his father's grave, named Pochita, that he keeps alive by feeding it his own blood. Not as a ritual, just because he didn't want it to die. And blood was the one thing he had to give. If you describe this child to any psychologist in the world, the diagnosis is complex PTSD, not standard PTSD, which comes from a single event. Complex PTSD comes from prolonged childhood trauma with no safe adult present. The symptoms are specific: chronic emptiness, a deep belief that you are worth less than other people, and extreme over-attachment to anyone who shows you basic care because you have no reference point for what normal care looks like. Go back to Chapter 1 with that lens, the way Denji does math about his soul die like it's routine, that wide smile he wears constantly. It's not happiness, it's armor. In 1965, psychologist Martin Seligman ran an experiment. He put dogs in enclosures and gave them electric shocks. Some could press a lever to stop it, others couldn't. No matter what they did, the shock kept coming. Later, he moved all the dogs to a new box with a low wall. Easy to jump, one clear way out. The dogs who could stop shocks before jumped immediately. The others just laid down and took it. They had learned their actions had no effect, so they stopped trying. This is called learned helplessness, and it is one of the most documented pathways into depression. Now watch Denji in every Yakuza Mopla scene in Chapter 1. No resentment, no escape plan. He thanks them for the work. He has been in that box since childhood and doesn't know walls can be jumped, which makes Chapter 2 hit completely different. Makima's udon is getting cold, so she sends Denji alone into the woods to fight a monster because she doesn't want her noodles to get soggy. And when Aki beats him up that same chapter and tells him to quit, Denji says, "Today was the first day I felt like a human. Someone treated me to a meal. I want to keep living like this." That's the entire reason he's a devil hunter. Not revenge, not justice. He had one meal bought for him and it was the best day of his life. I have to talk about Chapter 12. People laugh at this chapter. They should. It's objectively funny. But it is also the most quietly devastating chapter in Part 1. Denji finally achieves his dream of touching a girl's chest. Power agreed to it in exchange for help rescuing her cat. The moment arrives. He reaches out. Something falls on the floor. Breast pads. Power's chest was padded the whole time. And Denji, after completing his only stated life goal, comes back to the office and tells Makima it felt like nothing. Then he says something that belongs in a philosophy textbook. If I accomplish my dreams, will they all feel this empty? Would I be happier just chasing them? 16 years old, first chest, accidentally discovering what philosophers call the hedonic treadmill, where achieving a goal doesn't bring the satisfaction you expected because your baseline shifts and desire moves to the next thing. Denji found this out through breast pads, and it works as both comedy and tragedy because no external achievement fills a hole made by years of deprivation. You can't fix that kind of loneliness with a hug. And right on cue, Makima puts her hand over his. Right after that conversation, Makima takes Denji's hand, tells him things feel better with someone you know well, and guides it to her ear, her mouth, then her chest. Denji blushes and falls backwards. From the outside, this looks kind, but Makima is the control devil, a being whose literal nature is domination. And this is the most perfectly engineered move she could make. She didn't give him anything real. She gave him the promise of something real, conditional on his cooperation. In Chapter 3, Denji wonders whether Makima is good or bad, then immediately thinks about wanting to hug her again. That's the whole evaluation. She hugged me. I want another one. That is not stupidity. That is what happens when a person was never given the tools to tell the difference between real care and performed care. When you've never been loved properly, you have no benchmark. Anything that resembles warmth overrides your judgment entirely. So Makima builds him a family, Aki, power, people who genuinely come to love Denji. She gives him exactly what his psychology has been starving for. Then she destroys it in front of him. She doesn't find what Denji loves and take it away. She builds it, specifically to take it apart. I'm not going to describe what happens to Aki and Power. If you read it, you know. If you haven't, go read it. What I want to talk about is what happens to Denji after. In Part 2, he's something different. Still loud, still makes jokes, but there's a flatness underneath it now. He's saving money for Nayuta's education, a little girl who is the reincarnation of the entity that destroyed his life, and he's walking her dogs and packing her lunches. Absurd on the surface, the most human thing in the manga underneath, because Denji's response to losing everything wasn't vengeance or going cold. It was attaching the same desperate care to the next small thing in front of him. He just keeps doing that. In clinical terms, what's underneath his Part 2 performance has a name: anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things that used to bring joy. The most misunderstood symptom of depression, because a person with anhedonia doesn't look sad. They show up, they make you laugh, they just aren't quite there. And then Denji goes on a date with Asa to an aquarium. She tells him he doesn't have to think, just listen to her. He pushes back, says he'll think for himself, and goes to look at the penguins he wanted to see. That's the whole moment. Because the Denji of Part 1 agreed with Makima about everything and surrendered his preferences so completely he stopped having a self. The fact that Part 2 Denji, still broken, still carrying all of it, can say, I'm going to look at the penguins, is actually enormous. In Chapter 97, after everything is over, Denji falls asleep and Pochita appears in his dream. Pochita tells him his dream was just to be hugged, that his power was so enormous anyone he got close to would get hurt, so he could never be held. And Denji, without knowing any of it, gave him exactly that, just by being a lonely kid who held a devil every chance he got. Pochita's biggest dream was to be held without hurting someone. Denji's biggest dream was to be held. The only two beings who ever truly saw each other in this story were a boy in a shed and a dog that turned into a chainsaw. Neither could say what they needed. They just showed up anyway. Then Denji defeats Makima, not through power, because she never bothered to memorize his face. She never actually looked at him, so when they switch places, she can't tell. His invisibility was the weapon the whole time. He tells Kishibe eating her wasn't an attack. Becoming one with her, that was love. Probably the most Denji thing ever said. At the end of it all, the control devil is reborn as a little girl named Nayuta. She says she wants sliced bread. Denji says she's a pretty cheap devil to keep. Bread, again. Except this time, he buys it for her. Denji exists to be recognized. He's who we quietly are when we're running on low. Fujimoto didn't write a hero. He wrote a boy who talked to his dog about jam, who the first time someone hugged him, held on. Somewhere in that mess, you saw yourself, not the chainsaw. The kid on the floor of the shed, wondering if jam is really that good. It is, by the way. It really is.